They took everything from him overnight. But the next morning, the truth changed everything. David Carter, a veteran, lost his land when corrupt officials and a greedy developer tore his home apart. But when the truth about their scheme hit the headlines, the tables turned. What happened next became the biggest takedown the town had ever seen. David Carter stood on his porch, coffee in hand, as a fleet of black SUVs rolled up his driveway, kicking up dust. He already knew who they were. Robert Langston stepped out, slick suit, fake sympathy, and a contract that would rip 40 years of history right out from under David's boots. Mr. Carter, hate to do this, but the county's made its decision. You're trespassing. David's grip tightened on his mug. Trespassing? This is my land. Was. Now, it's Langston Manufacturing's future site. David's jaw clenched. I'm not selling. You didn't have to, Langston smirked. The bank did. You were late on taxes. We bought the lien. He tossed a folder onto the porch. Sheriff's coming soon. Take the settlement and go. David didn't move. He didn't blink. Langston sighed. Fine, start clearing the place. Workers tore down his fence. A bulldozer roared. Then came the sirens. Sheriff Dawson stepped out, adjusting his belt. David, you need to leave. David let out a bitter laugh. Didn't take this long to ship me off to war. 1 hour later, he stood by the road, watching his home crumble into dust. Nobody cared until the next day. David Carter spent the night in his truck, parked near what used to be his front yard. Sleep never came, not with the weight of the last 24 hours pressing down on him. He'd lost plenty in his life, friends, family, even pieces of himself. But this, watching his home get swallowed up by bulldozers while a grinning real estate shark signed the death certificate, that hit different. As the first streaks of morning lit the sky, he spotted something through the haze of exhaustion. A sleek black Dodge Charger rolling up beside him. Low, quiet, and unmistakably out of place in a town where most people drove battered pickups or practical sedans. The engine cut off. The door opened. A man stepped out, tall, lean, sharp as a blade in a tailored suit. His steps were measured, his posture controlled, but there was something behind his eyes. Something that said he wasn't just another government suit pushing papers. David Carter? His voice was steady, calm. Too calm. David kept his hands resting on the steering wheel. Who's asking? The man reached into his pocket, pulling out a leather wallet. A flick of the wrist, and a badge appeared. Federal. Raymond Cole, Special Investigations? David let out a dry chuckle. Feds? You're a little late, don't you think? Cole didn't blink. I need to talk to you about your land. David exhaled, shaking his head. Unless you're here to slap cuffs on Langston, I don't see the point. Cole stepped closer, lowering his voice. Did you know that the factory they're building is a front? David frowned. A front for what? Cole's jaw tightened. Weapons manufacturing. Illegal distribution. Your land was hand-picked because it's isolated, easy to secure, and outside city jurisdiction. They needed you off it, fast. David's grip on the wheel turned his knuckles white. His stomach knotted as he glanced back at the ruins of his home. The dirt, the splintered wood, the place where his wife planted wildflowers every spring. All of it was wiped out for a deal that stunk worse than a back-alley poker game. And the county just let them do it? His voice was quiet now, but the anger in it could have leveled a building. Cole's expression darkened. The county helped them do it. David turned back to the agent, eyes locked. So what do we do? Cole pulled out a folder, thick with documents. We fight back. Yes, David Carter had spent his life fighting battles no one wanted to talk about. But this was different. For the next 24 hours, he sat in a dimly lit motel room, listening to Raymond Cole peel back the layers of Langston's operation. And the deeper they went, the worse it got. Langston wasn't just some greedy developer looking to cash in. He was a key player in something much bigger. Wire transfers from anonymous offshore accounts. Leaked contracts tying him to defense contractors with questionable business practices. Blueprints of a factory that was never meant to produce anything legitimate. David wasn't new to corruption. He'd seen enough of it overseas to know how the game was played. The right people got paid, the wrong people got shut down, and if you were in the way, well, you ended up like him. standing in the rubble of your home while the men in suits shook hands over your land. Cole had enough evidence to bury Langston 6 feet deep in federal indictments, but David knew better than to believe in courtroom justice. Guys like Langston didn't lose in court. They delayed, they manipulated, and when all else failed, they made a few phone calls and the whole thing went away. If they wanted to take Langston down, they couldn't play fair, so David made some calls of his own. He hadn't spoken to some of these men in years. Time had a way of pulling people apart. But service? That was a bond nothing could break. He didn't have to explain much. They knew the drill. They knew what it meant when a guy like David Carter called out of the blue with nothing but a time and a place. By nightfall, they were ready. Langston and his crew were busy celebrating at some private club downtown, toasting their latest victory with top-shelf whiskey and cigars that cost more than most people's rent. They thought they'd won. Meanwhile, David and his team moved in on the construction site. The place was mostly deserted, just a couple of rent-a-cop security guards who were too busy scrolling through their phones to notice a group of highly trained men slipping in like shadows, amateurs. They worked fast, security cameras disabled. Every single one, either wiped clean or caught in an endless loop of empty footage. Equipment sabotaged. By the time the site crew showed up in the morning, they'd find every bulldozer, every excavator, every generator completely useless. But the real prize? The documents. Langston had spent years covering his tracks, making sure nothing could be traced back to him. But David and Cole had everything: contracts, email exchanges, proof of bribery. And in the dead of night, they made sure the whole world saw it. Every major news outlet, every federal agency, every whistleblower site. Within minutes, Langston's empire wasn't just compromised, it was exposed. There was no coming back from this. David stood at the edge of the site, staring at the dark city skyline, waiting for the first cracks in Langston's perfect little world. And when they came, he planned on watching the whole thing crumble. By morning, the world knew Robert Langston's name, for all the wrong reasons. David sat in a small-town diner, the scent of burnt coffee and bacon grease in the air, eyes fixed on the static-filled TV buzzing in the corner. Exclusive, corrupt developer exposed in arms-dealing scandal. FBI raiding Langston corporate offices. Senior county officials implicated in illegal land grab. David took a slow sip, watching federal agents swarm Langston's headquarters, dragging out files, hard drives, and stacks of paperwork. Then came the moment he'd been waiting for. Langston, in handcuffs, shoved into the back of an FBI van. The same man who had smirked on David's porch while bulldozers ripped apart his life. Pale, sweating, silent. No more backroom deals. No more connections to bail him out. And he wasn't the only one going down. The sheriff who carried out the eviction, fired. The county officials who signed off on it, under investigation. The factory project, dead before it even started. Langston had spent years covering his tracks, but David and Cole had burned every bridge behind him. The system he'd used to crush people like David had finally turned on him. David set down his empty cup, about to leave, when Cole slid into the seat across from him. "You did good, Carter," he said. David smirked. "You sound surprised." Cole didn't answer. Instead, he slid a manila folder across the table. David flipped it open. Official state documents. His name, his land. Restored. "The state's returning all seized properties," Cole said. "Yours included." David raised an eyebrow. "That fast?" Cole smirked. "Let's just say, sometimes the system needs a little push." David chuckled, tucking the papers under his arm as he stood. Outside, the sun was rising, lighting up the road back to what was once his home. And this time, nobody was taking it from him.